Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to encourage, and no one's under any restrictions. If you have technical issues that limit it, feel free to leave your cameras off. But if you feel comfortable to turn them on, this is a small group. Waves all around. Feel free to wave to people you know. Welcome to the first Design Observer Cooperative Community Session. This is a special session. I know that some of you have joined us through our guests tonight, so there are others in the conversation, but the cooperative is a subscriber-based effort that Design Observer created after 17 years of kind of giving it all away for free. We set up a space to say, instead of getting the kind of artifact of the conversation, we wanted to open up the conversation to a broader group. And so the cooperative are a group of people, many of the people on this call, that subscribe monthly to be part of these types of conversations. And this is the first one that we're doing as a community session just for subscribers, which brings me great joy, and I know Jessica as well. I just want to welcome Eric Rodenbeck and Nicolette Hayes, who are our guests for tonight. Jessica's going to lead the conversation with them, but without further ado, I'm going to turn over things to our co-founder and host for this evening, straight from the great state of Connecticut, Jessica Helfand.
Can I cede my time to the man in the great state of South Dakota? Welcome, everybody. This is so delightful, and it's our first time doing this, as Hugh said. Some of you, many of you actually, Emma, of course. Emma, would you wave to everybody? Emma's our favorite student ever in the history of all students, because Emma has come to every single one of these we've ever had. She's really, the fidelity to Design Observer is not going unnoticed. We're delighted to have you. But the ones that we do that are public, for which the proceeds go to Design for America, are a little bit more structured. I think this one will be a little informal. But it's a similar topic to what we explored last week. Last week, for those of you who were there, we looked at data visualization through a couple of different lenses. We talked to the people at Caltech Art Center and the Jet Propulsion Lab in California, where they have a very intensive data visualization program, really looking at design in the service of science. And then we talked to Jessica Bellamy, who is a designer and activist in Louisville, Kentucky, who looks at information design in the service of community. And I think we're going to look tonight at the work of Stamen Design through its founder, Eric Rodenbeck, and senior designer Nicolette Hayes, through all of those lenses and more. So I wanted to say a big welcome to Eric and Nicolette, and thank you for joining us. They're on California time, but that means that they can take their cue from Harper. Hello, Harper. Harper's got a nice glass of wine there, so all of you, if you'd like to have a beverage, please indulge. We do these things in the evening because they're quite relaxed, and again, we're very glad you joined us. So Eric, I'd like you to just begin the way many interviews begin. I'd like you to just talk to us a little bit about what led you to start Stamen Design, what your background is, what you weren't getting out of the world that you thought you had to do yourself, and maybe take it from there.
Sure. And I'm just so thrilled. I've been a Design Observer reader since I was in my 20s, and I'm quite a bit older than that now. So it's just amazing to be part of this community. Thank you. I got kicked out of architecture school in New York City in 1989. I had taken drafting in high school and always loved kind of mechanical reproduction and drawing with rulers and those kinds of things. And so I somehow convinced myself that because I was a good draftsman that I would make a good architect, and it was not true. So after that, I bounced around, tried to figure out what to do, and started studying science fiction at the New School in technology. This is pre-internet, kind of early 90s. And in 1994, got so interested in Wired magazine and the kind of techno revolution that was happening in San Francisco that I knew I needed to be part of it. So I thought that I was going to be a writer for Wired magazine. Because I was just so interested in the kind of California hippie geek thing, and all this work that Kevin Kelly was doing, and so I wanted to just be part of that. I didn't know how or what or how that could be, and just wound up being steeped in that world for a long while, and wound up eventually doing a little work for Wired magazine, because I was the only person who knew how to use Photoshop in San Francisco that wasn't at Burning Man over Labor Day weekend. So they called me, and I got a little gig there, and that's where things started. And then eventually I got a job at a .com company called Quokka Sports. And it was a very, very early internet 1.0 kind of, no business plan, trying to take over the world. And we did a bunch of really, the idea was to do for sailing what, with the internet, what football did for, what TV did for football. So like pre-TV, like football was this sort of very niche sport, played at universities, and then football comes along. I mean, then TV comes along and it all got really interesting. So we wanted to do that for sailing, and we did. There was a race that was sailing around the world called the Whitbread, and it was the first time that there had been GPS coordinates on these amazing boats that travel around the world. And they race in just insane conditions, 40-foot waves. And so so we had all this data pouring off the boats, and the idea was that you could start to tell stories using that data that would be more interesting than television. So for me, data visualization has always come out of this desire to entertain. I've never really been super worried about whether it was correct or not, or analytical or not. It's very, very much always been about a medium of creative communication.
What year was that, Eric?
97, 98.
That you're making things. And so were people talking about data visualization? Was it a field yet?
No, I would say I do data visualization and they'd say data what? Pretty common. But eventually I just started calling it maps. That was the sort of big, when I first talk to people, someone's in the bookstore and they say, what do? You say, well, I make maps. And they're like, oh, cool, I love maps. I'm like, I know. So eventually-
At some point maps became cartography.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to call it. When I hear that at the school that I went to in New York, the New School, that you can now get a master's degree in data visualization, kind of blew me away.
And that's not the only place, but so those words, that vocabulary came of age. And at what point did you started Stamen Design? What year?
2001.
And were you still calling things maps then?
I didn't know I was just trying to survive. So we got some work. Eventually we got some work with MoveOn.org, doing maps of their protests around the Iraq War, or the second Iraq War, I should say. And that's what kind of cemented it. That's where we started building a real kind of map focused consultancy. At first it was just programming, and after MoveOn, things really shifted.
I want to ask Nicolette about maps, because I think as a person who studied geography, you're going to have a lot to say, but I can't let this go because it's a burning question for me and perhaps for some of our group here tonight. Do you draw a distinction in data visualization between things that are interactive and things that are not?
It's a question for you, Nika, or is it for me?
For you.
Oh.
Well, for either of you, but I'm just interested, like at what point did it become something that was always screen-based?
It's not always screen-based. It just mostly. We've done 3D murals. We got asked by remember this one, Nico? We got asked by a shipping company based in Oakland to build them a 3D bathymetric map of the world, centered on Hawaii. So it's mostly digital just because that's where we can get paid to work. But it doesn't, and this has always been an issue, it's like, I've just been very clear about it. Like this is commercial work, right? This is not, and I find that it's actually really important to us to be really clear that it's not research. They're not personal. There are some personal projects, but it's commercial. We do what we can get paid to do. We're very kind of workman like that about it.
Well, we all are, and we have to be, but
yeah.
It's clear that you love it, Eric.
Yeah, totally.
I think that's funny what you said, though, because she asked about, interactive, and then you brought up an example that was 3D. Do we do 2D? I can't even think of anything that we've done that's just flat. Like we do things that have, interaction and motion, spatial dimensions. We do things in space. I guess we did a mural. A mural is flat, but still,
Would it interest you, for example, to do a book where you looked at a series of maps that were 2D presented in literary form, in book form?
We have done that.
You have done that, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us about what it meant to study geography before you got into all of this.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like the word geography is a little bit misleading in my case. I got into geography thinking I was going to do anthropology, meaning I was interested in studying people and places and cultures, and sort of why people did what they did. And then I went to, anthropology classes, and I realized that they weren't quite hitting the mark on what I found really interesting, and that the thing that I found interesting was actually just called geography at Berkeley, where I was studying. So I really focused on like the people side of geography. And there was, there's one little class called cartography that you could take. And there was this other little class called GIS that you could take. And I opted for GIS because I thought that sounds more interesting. I love maps, but like I'm more interested in like looking at what information you can put onto a map in a digital context. And then I just never did anything with it at all. It just completely fizzled out for me. And I had this degree in geography that I had absolutely no plans for.
So what happened then? Where did you go from there?
It's actually funny. I've heard Eric talk about, the beginning of Stamen so many times, and I've never really made the connection. At a moment ago, he said that he thought for a moment he wanted to go into publishing. And that's where my brain went, is I thought, what I'm really interested in is content. It's in storytelling. It's in, looking at the way people and places interact. Maybe I can do that through publishing. And so that's where I went. I started working in design at magazines, hoping that magical intersection of content would somehow be something I intersected with, and it absolutely 100% was not. I only did
doing editorial design.
Well, not even. I was doing advertorial design because I found my way into the advertising silo of Hearst magazines, and there was no crossover with editorial whatsoever. So I was just not doing what I had intended, which was, really engaging deeply with the things that.
So how were you rescued from that? What happened next?
Well, it's a funny little back door that I found. It was specifically Stamen. I did nothing of any interest in design really until Stamen. And I was just working at this funny little startup that designed iPad cases. And I was doing their advertising and marketing. And they had some beautiful cases, but mostly the thing that I found most beautiful were these just divine watercolor maps that they would splash across the inside of, you open up this bamboo iPad case and inside there's this gorgeous watercolor map. And I thought, this company seems like doesn't have a lot going on, but if they can make that, like, I'm sold, this is the place to be. And like 3 months in, I discovered that they didn't make that. This company called Stamen did. And I jumped ship.
And what did you see in Nicolette's work that made you realize that she got it?
It's been so long that I don't remember.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's 4 or 5 now.
5
years. Yeah. There's 2 things that I don't remember. It's when things happen, and then and what happened. But everything else, I'm like.
Yeah.
So what was the first project you worked on when you got to Stamen?
It was actually one of those projects that we made a digital version that then became a book. It was mapping the world of emotion for the Dalai Lama. An
unbelievable project. Can you talk to us about that project? And maybe, Hugh, can you find a link and put it in the chat window so people can follow along at home? That would be great.
That was your first project, Nicolette?
Oh, yeah. That was my all day, every day for the first couple months. I think it was my only project.
So it's so interesting, not to get in the way, but just this. I mean, I had been having really a hard time with the previous team on that project, and I was like desperately looking for somebody to collaborate with on it, because that was the 3rd version of that project that wound up going live.
I don't even know what to say about when you go to a job and your first client is the Dalai Lama. Where do you go from there? Like, what does that even mean? How did that work?
Yeah, I think I benefited from being brand new to the environment, in that it didn't occur to me to be afraid or paralyzed or think that it wasn't going to be possible. I just thought, oh, well, this is okay. This is what this is. I better get on board. Yeah, that's kind of all I can say about it. There was a very tight deadline. I think I started in April, and it had to be out the door by July, from like conceptual to being built. And like Eric said, there had been, a couple of revs before that with a different team that were so amazing. They were just gorgeous and beautiful work, and had crashed and burned because it just didn't capture sort of the spirit of the thing, which it ended up being a very, very emotional project. It was about emotion. It wasn't about taking quantifiable data and making it accurate. It was about capturing the spirit of something and making it tangible to people who didn't know how to think about it. And so I just sort of, I don't know, I took my design background and just listened to the amazing amount of context that Eric and our main contact over there, who was a psychologist, was that his role? Yeah, a psychologist, Paul Ekman with 50
This is Ekman, famous psychologist, right?
Yeah, totally.
So was Paul Ekman your client, or was the Dalai Lama your client?
Yeah, Paul was our day-to-day, and it was paid for and commissioned by the Dalai Lama.
Turns out they're really good friends.
Yeah, they're brothers from another mother.
I'm just stopping for a moment to think about the fact that the Dalai Lama has money, but I guess of course he has money. So keep going. Could you just frame the project for us a little bit? One of you, I don't care which one, either of you.
You go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so Paul Ekman walks into my office and he says, "I want you to make me a map of emotions for the Dalai Lama." And I said, "I have no idea what that means, but of course, like, why, how could I, obviously, yes, of course, I don't, tell me more." So Paul and the Dalai Lama have this really amazing relationship where over the years, they've gotten together. The connection is largely due to Paul's daughter, Eve. She really deserves a lot of credit here. But just over the years, they've written a bunch of books together. They get together and have conversations about stuff. And Paul has learned a bunch from His Holiness, and His Holiness has learned a lot from Paul. And the Buddhist conception of emotional states is just very different from the Western analytical one. So, like, I think the easy one that I think of is that in Tibetan Buddhism, there's no such concept of mood. Like, being in a bad mood is like not part of Tibetan Buddhism. And so the Dalai Lama was like, you mean there's this, like, you can just be in a bad mood and then you're, and then, so he's learning stuff about emotions. And Paul is learning a lot from him about compassion and meditation and those kinds of things. So they get together and their books are just amazing. To have these two giants of emotional wisdom and compassion kind of comparing field notes, as it were. So somehow in those conversations, the Dalai Lama told Paul that he wanted a map of this. And I guess Paul is still old school enough that he reads the New York Times every morning. And he had seen an article, like the physical New York Times, and he had seen an article that was published about Stamen and me. And so he called me up. And the mistake that we made early on was treating it like a regular data visualization project. Like, remember this, Nicolette? Like, we would ask Paul, "Where's the data?" And he would say, "Oh, it's all in my books." And then we'd sort of try and actually get it out of the books, and it wasn't formatted properly, and there's no, like, so we basically had to go get it from them. Like, the project came about. Eventually I just realized that Nicolette and I needed to sit down with Paul Ekman. Seems so long ago now, a whole different universe, but we needed to sit down at his kitchen table with pen and paper and watercolor and draw it all out. So it was very much a kind of sketching situation. It was not at all about like taking their data from their QGIS spread, and putting it into some software. It was about making drawings on paper.
Was there a moment during that period between April and July when the phone would ring, Nicolette, and somebody would say, "His Holiness on line 4. I just love the idea that was happening. Did that happen?
Yeah, no, the only overlap was actually on July 4th itself, wasn't it? Or was it July 3rd?
It was July 4th, yeah.
July 4th.
They did it on purpose. They did it on purpose to spite us. Like, they knew he's surrounded by this whole cadre of people that control access to him. And they were annoyed that we were so or that Paul and Eve were so insistent about meeting him. So they were like, all right, well, you can meet him on July 4th.
And you did.
Yeah. He came to the meeting wearing Mickey Mouse ears. It was in Anaheim, California. So, and I've been reading about this a bunch, that people that are really enlightened are typically, they have really good senses of humor. That great spiritual masters are like kind of laughing all the time.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah. So that, you know, this idea that enlightenment is kind of a joke. And then,
or that they're lighter, and it's certainly a lesson for us all.
Yeah.
We could lighten up a little bit. So,
yeah, it was mostly about Paul and Eve though. Paul and Eve were the main contacts there. I met him once.
do you have clients and projects that go on for many years? Like iterations of things? I'm thinking of this American Panorama project. This seems to be something that you've done a lot of. There are many pieces to it.
Those are the best kinds.
Yep. Because that way you just know, you know, and you're able to build a relationship. Nicolette is just wrapping up one that went on for years with this crazy ranch in Montana.
Would you like to talk about that? Tell us about that.
Oh, sure. That is such a funny project. We get just such different kinds of people walking through the door. It's the best thing. It's the absolute best job in the world. So there's this ranch in Montana. Yeah, good job, Eric.
Thank you.
There's this ranch in Montana where a rather wealthy benefactor owns, 10, 20,000 acres. It keeps growing. I don't even count anymore, of old ranch land. And he employs an army of 50 scientists to do whatever they really want in terms of preservation, conservation, just ecological studies of all sorts. So they go everywhere from, studying the biocrust, which is like, the minutia of the biology of the actual moss and soil underground, to the, herds of elk that trample the landscape and, affect the fauna and the flora around them. Anyway, there's a huge spectrum of science that is being done at all times on this ranch, and a large population of ospreys that make their nest there over, the summers, and then they fly down to Mexico and come back. So the first project that walked through our door, they said, we have all of these ospreys that, we have all this like money to put towards our science, and so all of our ospreys are wearing these little backpacks with transponders on them, and we have the ability to see exactly where they went when they left our ranch. We want to be able to put that on a map and share it with each other. They were like, oh yeah, and other people too, whatever, but mostly we want to be able to make sure that we can see them and that the person who owns this ranch can see them, etc. So we made a map of that. We got to name the ospreys because, they were these scientific specimens, but we were like, what would really make this a good story is if you could root for, Scooter on his way back from Belize.
Yeah, because they don't always make it, right? I mean, that's the other, it's like, sometimes the line just goes dark.
Yeah, that's a hard part. They actually have a kind of high mortality rate, so it's hard to get too attached. But, science, like they're used to it. They get it. So we made a map of that. As part of that, we discovered that they have incredibly military grade live cameras that are constantly filming all over the ranch, which is how you can watch the ospreys, tending to their babies in their nests. It's how you can see, the elk stampeding, just all kinds of amazing things. So we then got to do a project where we made all of these cameras across the ranch live and available. And I could give you the URL right now, and you could go and mess with those cameras and it would move around for everyone in the world. And they're okay with that. They just figure they'll just move them back if, it's not looking at something they want to study. And so, yeah, there were just things kept unfolding one after another. And we knew them well enough to be able to then, make the kinds of tools that they really needed.
What are those tools? What kinds of tools do they really need?
Well, one is a map of the ranch itself that breaks the entire property into different management units and then allows them to have an interface to detail all the different kinds of restoration projects that are happening there. They really hated making PowerPoints of their information because, that required choosing where the text went and like aligning images and things that just made like their skin crawl. They just hated it so much. So we built them a slide builder tool to complement this other resource so that they could just in a, you know, Excel sheet, which is their happy place, input the information that they wanted, and it would just spit out into this beautifully formatted presentation with, you know, full screen images and always aligned text, etc. So just, I mean, it's a great project because it just keeps growing. It's like, oh, we think we're done, but actually there's this little thing we'd like to also do.
The other thing with that Nicolette and her team have been working on is this matrix of the interrelationships between all the different life forms on the ranch. And it's been this wonderful, it's like, so you can do things like say, if it rains more than this amount, how many hunters can we allow on the property? Because what impact is that going to have on the elk population? Or if, you know, if we do this soil remediation project and the number of native grasses goes up by 5%, what effect is that going to have on the frogs in the pond and those kinds of things? So you can kind of mix and match all that stuff.
This world that you are so well versed in, that seems like you work on Mars to me and perhaps to some of the others here tonight. How do you stay abreast of all the things you have had to learn in the 20 years you've been doing this? Like it's like, it seems to me like it's changing the wheels on the bus while the bus is moving.
Yeah,
you
for sure.
have to stay abreast from those early years in the late 90s, early 2000s to what's going on now. And of course, I think parallel to that, the second part of that question would be maybe an interesting one you want to get into or not, which is how more populated the field has become around other people doing this work also. So how do you stand out?
No, I can be the resident old timer, talk about that. And also just to say how wonderful it is that we live in a world now where like kids coming into Zoom calls is like totally fine. So really, I'm sad for the world, but I'm glad for that. Yeah, no, I mean, I can talk about when, so I think Google Maps started in 2005, maybe. And I remember that project coming out and thinking, we are sunk. Like, we're done. There's no more work to do in the mapping fit because Google is going to eat it all.
Wow.
And I think that what we've done is to just really stay focused on the culture and the design part of things so that the tech giants don't eat our lunch. Like, so there's this kind of, it's not like we're like super all invested in a specific technology that suddenly the rug gets pulled out for us from under us. It's really by focusing on design that we've been able to continue doing it. So it's less about like we're a technology company that has users and more about like we've got design, we've got clients that have actual needs in the world. I think that's been the kind of main thing has been that, you know, we don't do a lot of speculating about what might happen. We respond to things.
You have to learn how to make things that, I mean, that don't date themselves, where the technology doesn't, the tools don't, they can continue to maintain them and use them for input. How do you actually do that? I mean, I can't even imagine.
Well, all the flash maps don't work anymore. So,
Here's my answer.
so that's done. I remember my advisor, Ben, saying to me, like he was somebody that used to work with us and I forget when Flash stopped, but you know, it was maybe 4 or 5 years before Flash ended. And he said, imagine a web with no Flash. And I was like, that's never going to happen. What are you talking about? Like, why would you, you know? Anyhow, how do, you know, I think you hire young people.
Yeah.
Seriously. I mean, you know,
Are they young people? There's so many of them here tonight.
I know. Yeah.
So, okay. So then the follow-up question I have for that, and then, you know, we can, if you've got questions, I want you to put them in the chat, as I think Hugh's asked you to do, because we can make this very informal and open it up. But the world that you inhabit, which is so intellectually rich and so global and so constantly changing, of late, obviously, is a pretty turbulent world, right? Yep. I mean, there's a lot going on. And I wonder if you could speak to, and this is not a trick question, because I don't even know if any of us are able to articulate this. I'm going to try right now. Mm-hmm. To what degree, how do you balance the complexity of information that has to be so at once sort of robust and resolute and accessible by so many, to this moment where individual voices matter in a different way, where the way people parse information and enter into something, where the way they digest visual material might need to be sensitized to a world that's less flattened by the kinds of metrics that we, all of us, not just information and data-driven people, are thinking about. You know what I'm saying? It's a moment of inflection and nuance and listening, and where the interactive nature of how people participate in the things you make might need to change. So those tools might need to become robust in a different way. How do you think about that?
You want to take that one, Nico?
I mean, I don't have a good answer. I feel like I need to have a good answer, and I'm working on an answer to that.
It happens to me all the time.
Yeah, it's been on my mind. I have been giving people this line for the last couple of years and getting away with it. I don't think I can anymore, which is, I don't know. There's this idea that, you know, data is real or it's truth, and everyone knows that that's not really true. But the line I've been giving is that I get around that by being in client services. So the message isn't really so much up to me. It's, we talk to the people who have a story that they need to tell. We look at their data and we do our best to kind of find the middle ground between those things. If, you know, it can't be told with their data, like, we explain that to them, and sometimes they're so disappointed. But if there's an opportunity to help them tell their story the way they are trying to tell it, that's usually where we go. So that's where, you know, sometimes maybe that is a cop-out for doing things exactly the way it really needs to be done in the world. But it's also the business that we're in. So that's where, I don't know, that's, in a positive way, it's my favorite thing about the job, is that we get to rely on the expertise of these people coming to us. You know, we don't have to be the filter. We don't have to be the analysts. We don't have to make the judgment calls. We get to just be sponges that absorb so much information and then, like, play it back to them in different ways to see if that's what it's supposed to sound like to them, which is it's a neat, like, interpretive position to be in, but it is not one that comes with as much responsibility, possibly, as, you know, when you're making your own work. I don't know. Does that resonate with you, Eric?
Yeah, I think of this quote that Richard Saul Wurman, who started the TED conferences, said, and I know some of us here have given, some of you have given TED talks. He said, if I'm selling my expertise, I love this. If I'm selling my expertise, I have a very finite amount of value that I can provide. But if I'm selling my ignorance, I have a potentially inexhaustible source of value that I can provide. And I don't mean to be glib about it, but I feel like what we try to do, especially in this moment, is just acknowledge, you know, a lot of our clients are experts in what they do. These scientists, you know, they just do science all day long, and they have no idea what it's like to not know what biocrust is. Or, you know, you could point to any number of examples of people who are experts and smart, and it's just hard for them to put themselves into the position of somebody who might not understand what they do every day.
I think what's interesting to me, Eric and Nicolette, is not the clients and you, but us, the people, the things you make that will be participated in by others, and how the power you have to wrestle content to the ground for us in such a way that when we participate in it, we come away learning something not just factual, but relevant to this moment, or emotionally relevant. And I'm going to give you an example of something very primitive that I had a student do once in my class that speaks to this in a little way, which is, I've taught for many years what I call visual biography. I'm interested in how we use technology and design to tell stories about real people. And I gave an assignment where you had to do a website, design a website. And this was early. This was a Cooper Union, like probably around the time you were starting your company, a long time ago. So website design was pretty primitive. But in a way, it was a good exercise, because it was really just about how you make something that someone else participates in interactively, which I think your work arguably is. And the student, they started with doing one about someone who died on the Titanic, and then the follow-up project was just to do a memorial on the web for somebody. And this student did a memorial for the Collier brothers. Now, do any of you know who the Collier brothers were? Because I'll tell you. The Collier brothers were two lunatic brothers, One, I believe, was disabled, may have been in a wheelchair. They were the original hoarders. They lived in New York. This was maybe in the 1940s. They never threw anything out. They were completely sheltered, living in just a swarming sea of newspaper. And I believe they died like when birds die in a cage within hours of each other. I believe they died within days of each other. And the police had to come and get them out of their apartment. And there's photographs that the news did of dumpsters, and they had to just push all the debris out of the apartment to even get to the bodies.
Right.
What the student did was tell the story by creating a website where each day when you went back, there was less there. In other words, it's self-destructive.
Yeah.
It was sort of an art piece, but it was such a beautiful form-content relationship where the actual, you started in this website that was completely a jumble, and you had to ferret out and find the information, and then the last day was just a white screen. And I never forgot it because it was a primitive moment in web design, but it got at the nature of the degree to which our participation in online visual media form can sometimes really be emotionally impactful and almost theatrical. I mean, this was really design as theater for me. And so I look at some of your work, the work you did, again, Hugh, I'm gonna indulge me if you wouldn't mind, if you would put a link to the beautiful thing you did with the taxi cabs in San Francisco that's in the SF MoMA collection. I could have those on my wall and look at those forever, and I want you to talk about those. The idea that a map can become something you want to know more about because you don't understand it. And then as you understand it, you go closer. And as you go closer, more information is revealed. And as more information is revealed, you learn something else. And in a sense, we could say that the rabbit hole of any kind of research on Google or archives, a place I spend a lot of time, does that. But I find in your work, there must be a moment where you're thinking about how it lands for others, not your clients, not you, but the public.
Yeah, so maybe Nicolette, I'll talk about cab spotting for a second, and then you can pick up the second part of the question, because I know that you think about that all the time. I mean, cab spotting was the success of that project was that people looked. I mean, there's a couple things. The first is that it turns out that they used a screenshot of the project in the original pitch deck for Uber. So I think Uber. It's not my fault, but I made one of the first pictures of it, but they and received no money. But it was a project about yellow cab taxis in San Francisco before anybody had mobile phones or anything like that. And so the real shift there were two things. I think the first was that rather than putting a bunch of data on the map, we made a map of the data, and that was a kind of key moment where, rather than putting a bunch of traces onto streets and buildings, we just mapped the data that was coming off the cabs. And we were resolutely committed to not adjusting the data that came back, but very much about just showing what was there. And so we found these kind of amazing patterns where we saw that buildings, that the GPS traces were less accurate downtown because the GPS signals were bouncing off the tall buildings, right? Or that you'd find places where the taxi cab depot was this kind of smear on the map because that's where most of the taxi cabs were. And then I think, so that was a whole conversation that happened, but there was a moment when somehow I got on an email list for Paula Antonelli, who's the design curator at MoMA, who's amazing and has done some just astonishing things. And she got this email, she sent me this, with many others, and somehow I forget whether I got past it with somebody else or not, but there was this email that she was putting together this show called Design in the Electric Mind that was going to be at MoMA. And she said, I'm looking for examples of innovative design or things that I should feature in the show. And I think it was this sort of key moment of stepping past this threshold of being ashamed to be self-promoting. Because I mailed her back and I said, I have this thing that you might want for your museum, and it worked, and it turned out. So there was I don't know, it was a big moment for me and for the shop. And I've rambled a bit, but I just wanted to maybe just get a sense of I always sort of encourage designers, get out there with your work, be a huckster, be a self-promoter. Like you have to be if it's gonna work out. But very much that one was about like staying true to this idea that the data itself was going to have a whole bunch of interesting insights in it. And it was less about analysis and more about like stepping back and saying like, what happens if we just let this thing run?
Nicolette, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, it's from a kind of a different angle, I think. Like something that cab spotting is so amazing about is that it actually did qualify itself as art because it was doing what you're sort of describing of, you know, being so pure to itself. But something that I've come across a lot is that the work that we do, the data visualization that we do, we get to hold to a very different standard than design work that I've done in previous jobs or previous environments where there's a lot of pressure, and it's like necessary to the work, but to make things immediately understandable, to make, you know, something appear above the fold, to have the analytics be good, to make sure that you're holding people's attention, that you're really like pulling them into the experience right away with the like very small amount of time that you've got. And so I think about that to some extent when we're designing data visualization. But I think so much more about the person who's going to end up at the bottom. Just making sure that you are rewarded for curiosity. And that is the greatest gift of being at Stamen, I think, for me personally, and why I'm, you know, staying there for as long as I possibly can. Because that was what appealed to me most about sort of information design, was not just assuming that people only have this much capacity to understand, or, you know, this much attention span or better things to do, but to really sort of give the work its due. And actually, I keep thinking of American Panorama, which you mentioned earlier when I'm talking about this.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that might have been my second project I ever worked on at Stamen. It's an encyclopedia. It's so deep and rich. And that actually is one that I think when you first look at it, it can be very off-putting because you're like, I don't know what I'm looking at yet. But then, you know, we found a couple
and
of
there are so many pieces of it, right?
Yep.
Yeah. But where it really sings is when Eric actually is presenting it in just like quick little snapshots. You can tell these like incredible yarns around just like this single frozen image from one of those maps. And it's the gift that keeps on giving. Sorry.
No. I mean, I think maybe just something to think about with data visualization is that like, there's no other medium where people say, you have to understand everything about this immediately. Like you would never say that about a photograph. You would never say that about a movie. You would never say that about a map. Like, so the way that I try and split it up is like, it should be compelling enough to you that you get a quick hit and you say like, that's awesome. And then it should also reward repeat viewing. And if we can focus on both of those things, then we've got something that can both grab your attention and keep it. And that's the sweet spot.
I just, Hugh, I want you to jump in here, but I just put a link on the chat. My favorite is The Executive Abroad, which sounds like an E.M. Forster novel. Just the title of it got me. And of course, it's a circle, which I have great love for. But you just click on this thing, and you see, you know, how many trips, I don't know, Harry Truman made, and then how many Obama made. And in that one moment, it's almost like this theatrical experience of understanding, like data hits you right here. I think it is just such an exquisite project. We're going to come back to this and talk about this in a minute, but Hugh, you want to jump in here, I think.
Yeah, I want to see if, because we don't get the privilege of having our favorite people ask questions during the studio sessions. I want to see if Kevin Bethune is willing to ask his question about process and topic to topic. We need to unmute you, Kevin.
Yeah, and I would also just say that, sorry to interrupt you, Kevin, but and thanks for the kind words about Executive Abroad. I should add that for American Panorama, we built the team there, the software that they used to build that project, but we didn't actually execute that one. So
okay, I'm done. Goodbye. Bye, everybody. We're done. It's okay. Your secret's safe with us.
No, I don't. Credit is important. It's really important that people get credit for the work that they've done. So I don't want to. I mean, I take credit for everything that Nicolette has done, but other than that.
No, thank you both for walking us through a few of those projects. It just sparked a curiosity around just trying to imagine what it was like to work with those different domain experts, topic to topic, that may have their own sort of process, hypotheses of what they want to do, what they want data to give them. So I guess, how do you balance some of those experts that may have a typical process of how they problem solve, whether it be a hypothesis-driven approach, a scientific approach, and you're trying to help coach or collaborate with your creative problem-solving process? How has that been, and do you have a sort of a set process or a range of flexibility to your typical process? Is it typical? These are just curiosities that came to mind as you were talking through these case studies.
Nico, you want to do that one?
Yeah, sure. I have so many thoughts about this. The one thing that I can say is that a drawback to doing this work, and a benefit, is that I actually don't know that we can ever really get that much better at it, because it really is like starting from scratch on every project. It has been I've done hundreds of projects. We do a lot of projects per year, and so few of them have any overlap. Like, you have to start fresh every single time, and it makes you feel a little bit like you don't know what you're doing, because you're like, I should be a professional. I should have this solved at the gate. I should know what to say in this first meeting and how to, get everybody onto the same page, but it's just so different every time. So you have to come to it with you have to embrace that as being something that that is your skill set. Like, we actually have a little phrase for it called being a professional amateur. Like, we have the appetite and the curiosity to just come in and learn and soak up as much as we can as fast as possible, so that we can then turn around and start actually being helpful instead of just being, in listening mode. But it can be really, really challenging. And I would say the number one challenge is not, as you might expect, dealing with people who have a very technical expertise. It's dealing with people who don't have expertise, people who have sort of an idea, but don't realize that they don't have any real content or data to back up that idea. And there is an entire month or two I could devote to just creating some presentation that teaches people what data is, so that we could actually hit the ground running with them. That is the most difficult kind of client experience to overcome, is the ones where you spend 2-3 months with them wondering why you're not visualizing their data, and you're still trying to figure out what their data even is. And not in the sense of it's qualitative like it was with the Ekmans and the Dalai Lama, because that, at least they knew what they wanted to express and they knew a lot about it. It's more like from the marketing teams or something, where they kind of have an idea about what should be told, but they don't have any ability to really
it's so interesting. Years ago, Clement Mock used to do a presentation about how half of what we should all do is educating our clients.
Yep.
That was such a sort of the important sort of nucleus of any success of any project rested on that. But I think what you're saying, Nicolette, which is far more true than many of us would like to believe, is how much of that rests on force of personality, right? Mm. Like, if you have a client who wishes that they were the designer, or a client who's annoyed because you are the geographer and they're not. Has that happened? You probably have great clients. That probably never happens to you.
Yeah, actually, it happens way less than you would expect. I find that people tend to be, if they do have data and they do have something they need to know, they tend to just be so excited to see it come to life and to see it visualized when it's only been living in spreadsheets, that they tend to be really, really generous with giving us some bandwidth to express it in a way that we think makes sense. They tend to be really open-minded, as long as they can understand what they need to understand from it, which is not my experience with other kinds of design work. Usually that color question or, whatever it is the make or break moment. But we tend to get a lot of leeway in that regard.
Kevin, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you so much.
The thing I would want to add to that, and I don't disagree with any of it, is that after a while, you start to develop certain kind of instincts and commonalities. And I think the point that Jessica made about the web piece about a memorial for a specific person, there's something about a memorial for a specific person that's different from a template for a memorial generally, right? And I can remember my high school English teacher was Frank McCourt. Some of you all may have heard of him. Yeah, no, it was amazing.
Angela's Ashes, Frank McCourt?
Yeah, pre Angela Ashes, Frank McCourt, and he would have us write a typical writing assignment from Frank McCourt would be, this was before he got famous. He would say, like, go to your families and find a recipe that means something to you and your family, and write it down and write down why it's important, and that's your writing assignment. And so there was something about the like very specific like nature of that, of just like, it's your family. Most of the children are children of immigrants or grandchildren of immigrants. There's always going to be something that you can tease out. So there's something about the specific nature of the work that I think is quite, that we try to hone in on. And what I try to say when I'm talking with clients in the early stages, when they're saying, like, you know, you can get into these conversations where we're saying, what data do you have? And they're saying, what data do you want? And there's this kind of standoff where everybody's just kind of looking at each other. Like what I've learned to say to those clients is, send us whatever is, like, literally whatever is easiest for you to send us. That's the criteria for the data that we want to see. Like, if you have it on your desktop, or you have access, like whatever it is that you actually have access to, that's the thing that we want to sort of dig into, because we're going to learn, like, because if you don't have any, it'd be good to know that sooner than later. And if you have a lot, it'd be good to know that. You know, there's so much that you can get from the specific interchange about a specific you know, sort of it's a specific ask.
Can I ask you the one follow-up question to this before we move on? And this is not a gotcha question by any means, but if you were asked to do an interactive map of something like the Vietnam War Memorial, I'm not letting this memorial thing go, because actually this is sort of interesting.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the mass data intersection with emotional wallop, and whether the neutrality and clarity of the language ever gets in the way of something. Is that, do you know what I'm saying? Like I think of something like, you know, the Holocaust Museum. I don't know. I'm thinking of things that are like, I don't know why I keep thinking of death, but like things that are emotional.
I wonder why.
I can't imagine why. You know, I mean, we've all seen, for example, those, I think it was The Guardian who did the long list of all the people who had been killed in the United States, and this was long before this year. I will find it when you answer this question. I mean, you think sometimes it's just the list. We see the things the New York Times does, the interactive things the New York Times does. What you do is a little bit different, but at the same time, I imagine that the flavor of understanding how to visualize the Osprey's journey, and the flavor of having to visualize what it means to draw a line between Harry Truman and Barack Obama, leads you to make certain visual decisions. To come back to Kevin's question, where are you drawing the resources from? It's not just the client and you, because it's you as individuals. It's like, what does Nicolette bring to that project? I'd love you to talk about those inflection points.
I can say one thing about that. There was a very concrete example that came to mind when you said that, which was, we did a project for Audubon, which is, again, another sort of science-y organization where they specialize in birds. And they wanted us to visualize how the bird species that exist within a national park will no longer be able to live there with climate change of varying degrees. So if the temperature's raised by 1.5 degrees, 20% of those birds that right now are there will be gone. And if it raises by 3 degrees, 80% of them will be gone, to just sort of give people this tangible understanding of, in their own backyard, this park that they've been to and this bird they've seen, it will not be possible. On the other side of that coin, there will be birds that are there now that they've never seen before. So, they didn't want to be all doom and gloom. But something that we ran across specifically when we were working on this is, we have this massive data set, and we had to distill these birds, entire species of birds, to single dots. And that just kind of broke our hearts, because we were like, but how do we do this? And fortunately, it was this, it's a beautiful website. There's like there's a masthead with gorgeous photography, there's an editorial flow. There's other opportunities to say, like, these are birds we're talking about. They're not dots. But we also found a way to have, we had them fly in. We had the dots like fly in. And the first opportunity we got to make a mural that was 80 feet long, we took those dots and we made them this big and drew the actual bird into every single dot, so that as you were walking along with your face, you could look and just be up close and personal with
that is
bird.
such a beautiful, beautiful example. Oh,
And
I love it. Okay. Yes.
I just want to be really clear that it was not we that drew the dots, but it was Nicolette that drew the birds.
I did. I drew so many birds. It was really fun.
Yeah, I would look over and like, what are you doing, Nicolette? She's like, drawing birds?
One more bird.
One bird.
What's the dream project for you, Eric?
I would like to do something in space. I don't know what it is, but I would like to do something in space. And I would also like to make something that I think one of the best pieces of praise that I ever got was that we ever got was for the Audubon Society, where it said, it was in the Atlantic, and Robinson Meyer said that the project makes it crystal clear that we live on a planet. And I think it would be hard to get better than that. Like I want to make work that makes it really clear that we're not just individuals living in boxes, but that we actually live on a planet.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. You've done a lot of work on climate change.
What's that?
You've done a lot of work on climate change.
We have, and we all know Milton Glaser died yesterday, day before. And I didn't realize this. His last project, he designed the I Love New York logo, and one of his last projects was he was trying to get the phrase global warming changed to global dying. Mm-hmm. He's got a whole like button that he was making and all that stuff. He wanted to change the terms of the debate, which he did with I Love New York, and we'll see whether he could get it.
Yeah. I was going to say, we always say we change the conversation by where we have the conversation. And these are a lot of boxes, but we are on the planet. And I want to come back to this question of climate change, because you've done a lot of projects about that. Do you find, and a little bit comes back to Kevin's question too, that starting to work in certain zones of influence gives you a leg up on the work, and that you learn things that you didn't know that make you rethink the earlier work? Or is it just all an aggregate and additive process?
That's such a great question. It's interesting. So I've been developing this notion that one of the things that we should be doing more of in the world is helping late career professionals like basically wrap their hands around their life's work. And that's what we did with Paul Ekman and the Dalai Lama. Like those guys are 83, 82, like, and one of the things that Nicolette was able to do was to make images that showed Paul Ekman his own work in ways that he had never thought of before. And I could get into the specifics of it. I don't know how much time we have. But
I want you to get into one thing, which is Paul Ekman is known for many things, but one of them is that every facial expression comes down to one of 7 facial expressions. Is that true?
Emotions.
Emotions.
Yeah.
But he did micro expressions too. He can read every single tiny muscle in your face and what it means. It's terrifying at client meetings. It's awful. Anyway, mostly we only had good faces on, so it was okay.
Remember Nicolette,
with a backpack.
We had this moment with him where we were like, how can you tell whether we're lying? And he said, only if there's money at stake. And I thought that was so amazing. He's like, only if you have something to lose. Like, if you want to bet me $1,000 that I can tell whether you're lying, I will totally do that. But it's not going to be some parlor trick. because you have to care. Like that was the sort of, it has to actually come from a place that you care about.
Big lie.
So I interrupted you though. You were talking about the climate change and what you've learned and how you go back and forth.
Oh yeah, no. So that's this is why we try and do as much work as we possibly can, is that like, there's always something to learn from every interaction. And so like these kind of patterns start to emerge once you start to develop a body of work that's of a good size, is that, these threads of like, maybe we should specialize in, we're doing a project with the Getty and Ed Ruscha that's all about this, these 750,000 photographs that he took of LA from a car that's driving around. We're going to launch it in August. and he's older too. He's in his 80s, and we're sort of thinking like, wouldn't it be amazing if our specialty would be in like making the corpus of work of 83-year-old scientists and artists digital? You know, that we would like basically like approach them as they, and we would like make lists of like, you know, artists and scientists that were approaching their 80s and be like, let me show you what we can do for you, you know, and that it would be like this incredible new like business line that we could start to, because they're all, you know, amazing. They've done all this amazing stuff, and they also, not coincidentally, have a lot of institutional support. So I think that's kind of what we're starting to look at, is just like, how can we, like, it's so important to actually work, you know, like, and not think all the time, to make projects and build projects and do things that start to give you a sense of what the world actually is. So I think about that quite a bit.
So you're thinking about space, you're thinking about the planet,
yeah,
you're thinking about the mortality, I think, by having these amazing clients who are scientists who are not, they have less time ahead of them than they have behind them.
Yeah.
I mean, I think these are all things that we are maybe all of us thinking of more right now because of the vulnerable position our planet is in, our families are in, our lives are in, the economy is in. Do you find, I'm again coming back to the American Panorama, because it was a collaboration between you and the Richmond, help me out, what are they called?
Digital Scholarship.
Right, which is such a great title. I want a title like that for.
So cool, they're so cool. Yeah.
Have you thought about, I mean, I almost wonder what would happen if you were to partner with, you know, the UCLA Oral History Project. Like, what starts to happen when the work you're doing exists less in isolated places for clients? I understand it's a commercial practice, and I'm not looking for you to be so altruistic, but the degree to which information design in concert with these other forms of media, film, oral history, I mean, particularly now that theater is imperiled, I mean, that cinema is imperiled, the idea that things that you make, that all of us make, can live in a repository, be accessible by others, be visited by others.
Yeah.
That, you know, our friend Emma, where's Emma? Is Emma still there? Emma's still there. Our friend Emma can see this thing in August when it goes up. It's through the Getty, right? And she doesn't have to be in California, which would happen anyway.
Nico, you got any ideas? I mean, in some ways, I would say this is closer to the original idea of the internet that I got super involved with, right? That we would actually be flattened, that it wouldn't just be Mark Zuckerberg who tells us what we can access and not, right? But that, and what I've, maybe you found this too, but like I'm finding people like Jessica Helfand incredibly easy to connect with over Zoom, you know, like it's just, it's amazing.
I was easy before Zoom. I'll be easy after Zoom.
No, but you know, it's like, it's been kind of amazing to realize, like, because everyone's like looking at their computer. And it's, I mean, it's horrifying what's happening. I mean, and just to come back to that idea of a memorial, I mean, the New York Times did something a couple weeks ago that was the names of 100,000 fucking people. It was just horrific, and you can't even imagine it.
But how does an information designer, data person, cartography person see that? I mean, we were all affected by it, but you must have seen it on a whole other level.
Well, I think it's this moment where they, I mean, it's you know, there's that monument to the people that had to leave Paris because they went into concentration camps. There's the lynching museum. There's the Vietnam Memorial. And then I think in the same breath, we can talk about the front page of the New York Times. You know, I think this is like this sort of digital moment of like, this is how we operate now. Seems real.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's not good data visualization for sure. Like it didn't feel separate to me. I definitely thought, oh, I wish I'd made that. Like no part of me thought that's a separate, you know, modality than what we do.
The problem is that the monuments, well, you have to go and see the monuments, and you have to go and find the page. And a little bit the question is, where do these things live? How do you find them? You know, if you, I mean, we're all only as good as our little rectangle, unless you're Hugh, and then you have a really great rectangle because you have this really great camera. But, you know, to the extent that this is it, you're looking at it. That's my real estate. And it levels the playing field in terms of interaction for sure. But but I think the work that you make, I mean, you are an incredibly prolific studio. You have done so many projects.
The story I like to tell about that is an apocryphal one, is about the pottery teacher who divides her class into 2 sections. And to the one class, she says, one section of the class, she says, I don't care how much work you make. I don't care about anything other than the quality of your final presentation. And then she says, and you don't have to, I don't care if you come to class, I don't care what you do or whatever. And then the other half of the class, she says, what I mainly care about is volume. like you will be judged by the weight of the number of pieces that you have made by the end of the semester. And then of course, you know, the class goes on, and of course, like the students that are focused on quantity, not quality, return higher quality work in the end, because they just kind of don't care. They're just, because they're just trying to make as much work as they possibly can.
Right.
So I don't know how useful that is. But I guess I would just say, like, there's a notion that, like, make as much work as you possibly can, because you never know what's going to land. I think that's actually really important, to not get super precious about, like, I put all my eggs in this one basket, but, like, make a bunch of stuff. That's been.
Which is my perfect moment, because Hugh's brilliant setup just blew. So he's going to come back to us on a normal civilian camera in a moment. And if he doesn't, I guess I'm just hosting this and moderating. I just want to share with everybody that there you are. You're back with your unexhausted battery. I had a marvelous conversation with Eric a few weeks ago where he regaled me with some of these stories. And at the end of the conversation, I asked him, and I have to share this now, and I hope that you'll share it with everybody. Something like, what do you do for fun? Like, what do you do when you're not thinking about the future of climate change and cartography and working with amazing people like Nicolette? And you said, I'd like to think about knots.
I do.
And so, and it now in hindsight, it made total sense to me. In 30 seconds, it made sense to me. I'd like you to take a few minutes and show everybody what you showed Hugh and me earlier, and talk about why knots fascinate you.
Yes.
I'm so lucky, you guys. It's just you all. I get to show my knots to Jessica and Hugh and all of you. So I found this funny little book. Yeah. And it's by Philippe Petit.
Tightrope guy.
Yeah, tightrope guy. He strung a wire between the twin towers of the World Trade Center. I forget when, in the 70s sometime. And now he's riding that, like he's making hay out of that, man. He's like psyched to be doing that. But it's the most charming. So first of all, it comes, I don't have it, but it comes with a rope in the middle here. So it like, and then it's just these incredibly charming little drawings of, you know, here's how you tie string around the end of a knot. Here's how you set up a sheep shank with toggles. It's like, it's just gorgeous and beautiful and amazing. And it's like, and then it's like, I'll see if I can find one. Yeah, no, so this one is really good. So this one is like, I was asked to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Lincoln Center, and I strung a tightrope across, you can see him there. I strung a tightrope across Lincoln Center, and I had a bottle of, 1945 Dom Perignon in the pool at the bottom of, in the middle of Lincoln Center. And I needed the perfect knot to be able to like pull the, to be able to pause in the middle and pull up this bottle of champagne, So it's all like, and then it's like, here's how you hang a ladder. It's amazing. It's so much fun. Like, here's how, if you are the bell puller for a bell in a belfry, that's how you hang your knot so that it doesn't hit the ground, because you don't want to hit the ground. Like, it's so sweet and lovely and beautiful and freeing. And it's just got all these like amazing little, anyway, so it captured my whole heart. And since then, I got involved in like making this kind of stuff. Which is
you've got Emma's heart.
Emma, I see you. Yeah, so I'm just like hanging out. This is called a Turk's head. It's a turban. And it was the knot that you would put around if you had like a big wheel that you were sailing with, you would put this around the post that was in the middle, so that in the middle of the night when it was dark, you could tell which one was the center one. But there's something just so incredibly so fun about it, and also meditative, in the sense that like the knot is either like exactly correct or it is exactly not, which is so. I mean,
I have a theory about this, Eric, that comes back to the conversation that Nicolette brought up earlier about 2D, 3D mural, which is that the knot begins from a single strand that, through the ingenuity of the maker, becomes a three-dimensional object. And I think that is what captures your imagination. Or just making macrame. What is that?
Fucking macrame.
Oh, it's DNA.
Yeah, right. It's been, anyway. I could go on. I will go on. Maybe we could have a separate knotting conversation.
We'll have in July, our community session will be about knot making. Can you just quickly tell us whether the knot fetish has made its way into your work in the office? Or maybe Nicolette can tell us. Are there?
Not yet, I don't think.
Not yet.
Well, we don't really have an office. I mean, that's the other part that's so wacky, right? Like,
No, that's true.
yeah, we're just not. I mean, I haven't seen Nicolette in 4 months.
You said 3 more children since you saw her last.
Well, that has been an amazing change, is that my whole frame was around like having a small office, small people, not small people, but small numbers of people. We can meet around a table. We can, you know, we can have that shared experience. And now that's just gone. So,
And we have this shared experience.
yeah, no, this is good too.
We have about 15 minutes left, and I just want to open it up to all of you. Questions for our lovely guests? Answers for our lovely guests? You'll have to unmute yourself. And don't be shy.
You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think about all the coronavirus graphics and stuff? Is that like something that you roll your eyes at? You're like, oh, I don't want to see another one, or do you look at them and see like so many design potentials that would resonate so much better with society if you did them differently?
What do you think, Nico? You want it?
Yeah, I have so many personal thoughts about this. So I'm going to start not with coronavirus. I live in California,
Okay.
In the Bay Area specifically, and I grew up in Sonoma. And a couple of years ago, there was massive fires that were just everywhere. And it felt like, and I couldn't find good maps of it, I couldn't find good information, but it felt like every single place that was important to me growing up was being targeted. And so finally, in the dumbest possible way, I just hobbled together a map of my own, and I put the places that I cared about onto that map. And I tracked whether or not that fire line was coming close to all the places that I cared about. And it was awful because I'm a designer. I work with design technologists who actually do most of the GIS and like really, really intelligent, amazing things that we do at Stamen to make things real. I come up with the ideas and then I, use limited tools to make them real. And so when I didn't have, my entire team behind me, I was really sort of handicapped. So that is something that I feel now with coronavirus too, is I'm still always looking for, that best graphic. I cannot see enough of them. None of them ever quite do exactly everything that I would do. I would make that rabbit hole even deeper. I would give even more information about every little facet. I would make every single piece of it interactive. Like I can't get enough. I just want to keep going further into the data until we get to, the answer, the solution, until we save the world. Like it's awful. And I would say,
I feel like that's how like, I feel like every time I see one, I'm like, oh, that's it. That's all this graphic is going to tell me. So for people that like, this is your specialty, it just like drives you nuts seeing some of them.
It's good design to really stick to the one thing that you can say. But yeah, just not always as satisfying. And I actually would also say that I have access to, this community of people who can find some of the best visualizations out there. And I don't know, this sort of speaks to what you were asking earlier, Jessica, I think too, about like having everything available. Sorry, my baby's getting very tired. having everything available at your fingertips in this digital medium seems like it should be the answer, like you should be done. But I still find myself just digging and digging and digging and not being able to find everything, and feeling like I'm still at a loss.
There's a great post that Elijah Meeks wrote at the Data Visualization Society late last year, where he talked about, I'll post it. There's this amazing map that Donald Trump has in his office, and it's a map of all the counties that voted for him, and it looks like there's a ton more that voted for Trump than for Bush, but when you skew it by population, you realize that like most of those counties, there's no people in them, right? So, and Elijah's main point, I think, that was so amazing was he said that for a lot of people, the visualization is the data now, right? And there's this kind of, and I just, it's been just replaying in my head over and over again that like we're not in a world where rational people are empirically accessing neutral communications. Like we're just not. That doesn't exist. And getting used to that is maybe the first step towards trying to be effective in it. Like,
but it actually places so much value in what you do, because A, the news is coming fast and furious. B, we know a lot of it is fake. We can't tell what is a bot. There's so much need for clarity and verisimilitude in the torpedoed incoming information.
Yeah.
But I think there's something by its very nature about data viz that looks authoritative.
Right, totally.
Right? It's like, it's a dot. It has to mean it's a bird, and then you get up closer and you see it actually represents the gross national product of Nicaragua, and you think, what was I thinking? You could really fool people.
Yeah. And I think stepping into that is very important. I think people used to feel, I want to just make a plug for this amazing book by Bruno Latour that kind of expresses what's going on. It's called Down to Earth. And it's just about the new dialogue that we're having around maps and climate and those kinds of things, and about how we separate ourselves from nature. But I just think this idea that like there's a neutral map is kind of a gone idea, for better, for worse. That this idea that we can sort of,
that neutrality is over.
Yeah.
Well, what a crazy truth you just said, that like visualization is the truth now, right? Is the data. Like people just see things on TV and they immediately digest it, and then that's what becomes truth to them. They don't like the way that it's portrayed on media is the way that they digest it and what becomes truth to them.
Yeah.
That's
no,
crazy.
Thanks for that. I mean, yeah, it's this was not the idea. I had a different idea for how things would go. No, we really used to feel that like, if I just show you the data, your opinion will change. It turns out it doesn't work that way.
It's a weird manipulation of it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. And I just to keep on that thread, I mean, that's reality, right? I mean, that's not an edge case. That's what's up. That's where we live. And if we pretend that we don't live there, we won't win.
So maybe I wrap up to not leave us on that note, Eric. Tell me about the hopeful future. Tell me about especially as you engage in things like climate change. Like, do you have any glimmers of hope in terms of the ability for that data to change minds? Do you see emerging platforms or uses of the tool set that leave you encouraged and inspired? Give us a glimmer of hope, and then I'm going to very quickly wrap us up.
I don't know. I don't want to say anything banal. I mean, I read so much about the young people who have a different frame of mind. I don't want to just push the problems onto the young people. I don't know, Nicolette. What are you thinking about?
Oh, I have one. It's a very concrete. Yeah. It's a very concrete project that I'm working on that I don't know if I can really talk about, but it's a well-known philanthropic organization is asking us to create an interconnectedness diagram of the entire world based off of the years and years of research that they have access to that talks about how all of the systems that support us basically have this one thing in common, which is the centrality of health. And that when you lose that, your entire system fails, and that this moment is an opportunity to bolster those systems so that not just, you know, the developed world, but the entire world and people who have less access are actually supported by something coming out of this experience, now that we've all seen what it actually feels like to have health pulled out from underneath us, so that, you know, they can put more funding into that and create better systems going forward. And they're asking us to visualize that, to come up with a visual that makes people understand that in a moment. And it is so hard, but it's so exciting and it feels so worthwhile. And I feel like I'm going to save the world if we pull it off. So
Nicolette definitely, like, she gets into these problems where she's like, there is no way forward that we can be successful, and I'm going to try anyway.
There's something, I'll just wrap by saying, when I sat with your shared work for the first time, I definitely entered into exploring it with this sense of data viz, elevating and celebrating the data rather than the humanity. And I left looking at your work feeling exactly the opposite. The introduction of place through the maps, the introduction of some of the messiness of the human experience as a function of the data, I think lives in the work that you do, which I think differentiates it from some of your competitors and colleagues across the landscape that see the data first and not the story. So I want to celebrate that just as something that I think was pretty fantastic to spend time with. But more than anything, I want to thank the two of you for spending time with us tonight and being willing to share kind of the background and process and insight of the work that you're doing, and the work that I find hope through people that help simplify incredibly complex things. And so you provide me that glimmer of possibility that some of these concepts that seem beyond comprehension can actually become accessible and interactive. So can I ask just the group through some visual sign, or Emma, if you want to cheer, you cheer, but visual signs of gratitude to thank you for the time tonight and for joining us. It's a great value to, I think, the world at large, but we certainly appreciate the conversation.
And I just want to add to that, this was our first community session for the cooperative, and you lucky people got to hear these people talk about such important work. I mean, you know, there's a reason they won the National Design Award, but to see this work that goes on and on, to ask these, I think, penetrating, robust questions of their clients and of all of us at a moment when we have to start asking better questions and listening and looking in a different way. I found it incredibly inspiring, and I'm already looking forward to whatever we're going to have to do next month to top this, which is going to be tough. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming. Thank you, Nicolette and Eric. We will have a videotape of this, I guess, that we'll share with the co-op. We'll certainly share it with our friends at Stamen Design. And thank you. Stay home, stay safe, be well.
Thank you.
We're blown away. I'm blown away. Thank you. Amazing. And good to meet you all. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for your questions, and super, just fantastic to be in the conversation.
Thanks. Nicolette, go give that baby a kiss.
Thank you.
Bedtime.
Bye.
Bye.